You've had Wendy's nuggets dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new Saucy Nuggs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic, parmesan if you're a real heat seeker, the spicy ghost pepper, and it's very spicy. You can also spicy up your buffalo and honey barbecue. That's a pro tip right there. 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's. Welcome to Andy Staples On 3, presented by Wendy's. It's game day, week 1. It all gets started now. We had our week 0 appetizer, but everything gets rolling tonight. Howard-Rutgers, I believe, is your first game. I believe 6 p.m. Eastern time is the first game that's on. The two kind of feature games, Colorado, North Dakota State, North Carolina, Minnesota. Remember that Nebraska-Minnesota was this game last year, and it was a weird one. A weird one. Nebraska should have won, kept giving the ball back to Minnesota. Minnesota wins in a thriller. This one, the line flipped this week. Minnesota was favored. Now North Carolina's favored. We don't know who's going to play quarterback for North Carolina. It could be Max Johnson, could be Connor Harrell, could be both. Max Brosmer, your QB for Minnesota, the New Hampshire transfer. So we got that. Before we talk more about these games, because we got some updates for games tonight, for games Saturday, I want to update you guys on the schedule for the show because it is changing as the season is starting. So get ready. We're going to do quite a few changes here as the season starts. There is no live show tomorrow morning because that 5th live show is now moving to Saturday night. So Saturday night after the games, I'd say midnight Eastern time is the time it'll be. Midnight and 1 second Eastern time. So really, it'll be Sunday morning. But we'll have a live show breaking down all of the week 1 Saturday games. Now, that doesn't mean you won't have anything to watch/listen to on Friday because I'm going live after the games tonight. So I'm going live after Colorado, North Dakota State, after Minnesota, North Carolina. There are some other games. Who knows? Some weird stuff could happen. You never know. But going live, we're going to talk about those games. We'll put that show in the podcast feed as well. So if you're a podcast listener and you're like, wait, I got nothing for my Friday commute home. No, don't worry. It'll be there. So you'll have that breakdown of the games. And we're going to do that when there's big game action. We'll probably pop on live after that. So next week, the schedule, again, Monday through Thursday for the morning shows. But the morning show time is changing. Little real life stuff going on. And all of it will make sense when you pop in for the show on Monday. But 9:30 a.m. Eastern time will be your new start time. I did see somebody in the chat the other day say, this is way too early. I'm out of here. I'm going back to bed. Well, it won't be that early for you anymore. And our friends on the West Coast, more of you will be able to watch live because it won't be pre-dawn where you are. So 9:30 a.m. Eastern time, starting Monday. That will be when your weekday shows start. And then, of course, do not forget that Saturday night show after the games. You come hang out, chat, heckle, tell me how wrong I was about my picks. Remind me that you were right about your picks. I get it. Understood. But let's talk about some games because there are some very good games on tonight. There are games on tomorrow night. And then the full menu on Saturday. Little bit of news. Our friend Guy Haberman tweeted this out on Wednesday night. Little nugget for the North Dakota State at Colorado game on Thursday. So the FCS does not allow the helmet communication. Remember, the helmet communication is a new rule in the FBS. They've had it for 30 years in the NFL, but for some reason it took this long to get it in the FBS. They will have it on their sideline, though, for North Dakota State. So basically, if an FCS school is playing an FBS school, they're allowed to use the in-helmet communication. They just have to purchase the system. They have purchased it for this one game. and then any future games, obviously, against FBS opponents. But they have purchased it for this game, which it tells you the Bison are serious about this thing. They are serious about going to Boulder, having a chance to win. Colorado is a 9.5-point favorite. You heard Deion Sanders at Big 12 Media Day saying, hey, we respect this opponent. We've seen them on film. They're very disciplined. They're very well coached. That's absolutely true. This is a no-win situation for the power conference team in this situation, because if you lose, you just get laughed at. If you win, you were supposed to win. But this is the type of team that is going to push you, and you're going to have to work really hard to win that game. So if Colorado comes out and blows the doors off North Dakota State, that's an impressive win. Like, don't say, oh, they just beat an FCS team. Like, you don't get to change your mind on that. It's an impressive win if they win impressively. If North Dakota State pushes them, it doesn't mean that Colorado is necessarily going to stink either. Like, if Colorado wins a close one here, yeah, North Dakota State's going to be tough for everybody they play. So, Steven in the chat, all the money going on Colorado has me nervous and tempted to fade them. Steven, I don't know what advice to give on this, because when you have rosters that are that new, there's just no telling how everybody's going to play together the first time. It's very hard. I mean, like Colorado last year, we were completely surprised by the result of that Colorado TCU game. One, TCU was coming off playing for the national title. We underestimated how much they had lost. They had lost most of their very special players from that team that played for the national title. And Colorado, we didn't know. And then Colorado came out looking great, beats TCU, and all of a sudden the mania begins. I don't know that there's a mania if Colorado wins this game big, but it'll certainly make Colorado-Nebraska next week much more exciting. Colorado loses this game, it takes a little shine off Colorado-Nebraska, although the schadenfreude from the Deion haters will be, they'll be loud. Let's put it that way if Colorado were to lose this game. Little other news, our friend Tyler Horka from blueandgold.com, the On3 site that covers Notre Dame. The piped-in crowd noise and marching band music at Notre Dame practice this evening is the loudest I've ever heard. The Irish aren't taking any chances for what they might hear or what they might not hear against Texas A&M at Kyle Field on Saturday night. Listen, all of y'all who have played the EA Sports college football video game, you know they made Kyle Field the most difficult place to play. I'm not sure Kyle Field is the actual most difficult place to play, but I will tell you from having been on field level at Kyle Field since it was expanded during a close game, it is loud. It is deafening. So Notre Dame will have to be prepared for that. Obviously, Notre Dame plays big games. They've got players who've played in hostile environments before, but this may be the loudest that most of those guys have played in. So obviously communication at a premium. You know, we saw Haynes King, the Georgia Tech quarterback, in that Georgia Tech Florida State game in Dublin, doing this with the helmet. We see it with NFL quarterbacks doing it as well to block out the noise so they can hear the coach in their ear. I've wondered about that because there's a couple stadiums in the NFL that get super loud, like the Superdome in New Orleans, Lumen Field in Seattle, Arrowhead in Kansas City. Those get very loud. But they seem to manage the communications just fine. That said, those places don't get as loud as Kyle Field, as Neyland Stadium, as Tiger Stadium, as Beaver Stadium at Penn State, as the Swamp. So we're going to see it tested in all these places where it gets incredibly loud. We'll have a better idea of, like, does that even work? Like, can you be so loud that even a microphone, a speaker in the guy's ear with his hands over the ear holes, that he can't hear it? It's going to be a fun one. This is going to be very interesting. Another weird quirk of this game, and I guess a weird quirk of the transfer portal, Texas A&M DB Jaden Hill is suspended for the first half of the game for a targeting penalty in the second half against Florida State last year. I know what you're thinking. Texas A&M didn't play Florida State last year. What are we talking about? Well, Hill played for Florida last year. He got a targeting penalty in the second half of Florida's final game against Florida State. And so he's out for the first half of this game as a Texas A&M player. So yes, the targeting penalties do follow you through the transfer portal. They can slip into the transfer portal and travel with you to your new destination. That just a weird one, like something that happened in Gainesville against a team Texas A&M didn't play, affecting a Texas A&M Notre Dame game week 1. But hey, it's only fair. If they were going to make him sit, if he stayed at Florida, they were going to make him sit out the first half of the Miami game. It's the same thing, but it's just weird. Just weird. Speaking of Florida, Miami, Florida coach Billy Napier updating the status of Montrell Johnson, the running back at Florida. That's their best running back. Remember, Trevor Etienne transferred to Georgia. So Montrell Johnson is their number one running back. Now, part of the problem and the reason Trevor Etienne transferred is Montrell Johnson has been their number one running back. Trevor Etienne was probably their best running back, but for whatever reason was their number 2 running back. And Georgia offered some money, and off he went. Montrell Johnson had knee surgery to clean up some damage earlier in preseason, and it was considered a fairly minor thing that he'd be able to get back from. And Billy Napier says he's probably going to play against Miami. So that is very good news for Florida, because not just for what Montrell Johnson gives them in the run game, but also in pass protection. This is a guy who, 1, he's a very good and willing pass blocker, but 2, he's a veteran who knows exactly what he's supposed to be doing on every play. So that's a big deal. Other news from that game, Miami had a little fun on Instagram with their uniform announcement this week. Obviously, Miami wearing white jerseys. They're going all icy white, white helmet, white jersey, white pants. And the Miami football accounts on Instagram and Twitter tweet out, someone told us to wear white on Saturday. Well, who was that? That's Florida. Florida told its fans to wear white to this game. Now, Florida's fans understandably pushed back on that, because they're like, wait a second. What? You guys know Miami's going to wear white because Florida's wearing blue. And the fan base, I'm guessing, is not going to listen. I don't think they're going to show up wearing all white with Miami in all white. But just another Florida athletic department just not quite getting it. And I understand where they're coming from. They're going, it's a 3:30 game in Gainesville, Florida on August 31st. It's going to be 94 degrees with 1,000% humidity. But I will tell you, as someone who has lived in the greater Gainesville area for, at this point, most of my life now, it doesn't matter what color you wear. It's hot. It's sticky. It doesn't matter. So Florida fans, wear whatever you want. Wear blue, wear orange. Probably don't wear white, because that's what Miami's going to wear. But it's going to be hot and sticky. You know that. You're Florida fans. Like, that's the thing. With a stadium full of people who root for Florida and Miami, like, they already know how to deal with the heat. They live in it every day. It's not a big deal. But I thought that was funny. Miami having some good fun with Florida's not quite getting it whiteout announcement. I know what your Penn State fans are saying. Hey, we wear all white for the whiteout, and we know our team's wearing dark jerseys and the opponent's wearing white jerseys, but we still do it anyway. Yeah, but you guys, it's your own thing. This is different. And again, everybody, we're all Floridians here. We're all Florida man. Like, everybody understands it's hot and knows how to deal with it. Oh, but it's going to be a fun weekend. Fun weekend. So we've talked about all these games for Thursday, for Friday, for Saturday. There's a game on Sunday, and I don't know that we've given it enough attention. So right now, let us talk LSU and USC. And this is your LSU USC preview presented by Prize Picks. You download that Prize Picks app. You play $5. You get $50 instantly if you use the code STAPLES. How does Prize Picks work? Well, it's the best daily fantasy game in America. You pick squares involving players. There'll be a player. There'll be a number. In this game, let's say Garrett Nussmeier, the quarterback for LSU. He will have a number next to his name, 279.5 passing yards. You decide, do you think he will throw for more than that or less than that? So you pick at least 2 squares. The more squares you pick, the higher the potential payout. And that is how Prize Picks works. Now, let us talk about this game through that lens. Because, yes, I realize the numbers tend to go towards skill position guys, but the line of scrimmage is going to matter a lot in this game. LSU's offensive line, I think, really could be the key to this game. And here's why. It could allow them to control the ball on the ground, to eat clock, to control tempo, which I think is going to matter in this game because, remember, we're dealing with 2 defenses that were really bad last year. Both staffs have been overhauled, new defensive coordinators, new defensive assistant coaches. At USC, they've overhauled the personnel more than they have at LSU. But LSU does have good athletes on that defense. So the theory is that Blake Baker, say that 5 times fast, can come in and just move the pieces around and they will play better. At USC, D'Anton Lynn, he got quite a few new players, brought some from where he was at UCLA, brought some from elsewhere, but definitely was trying to get the body types that he wanted in his defense. That was a big knock on Alex Grinch when he was the defensive coordinator at USC, is sometimes the body types didn't match up to what you need to run an effective defense, but that was more along the defensive line. And so we'll see. But that defensive line at USC is still really not their best group. Barry Alexander is very good, but they're going to be playing against an LSU offensive line that has Will Campbell and Emory Jones at tackle. These are potential first-round draft picks. This group's been together. They're good on the inside as well. Can they run the ball well? So, Josh Williams probably gets the first carry for LSU, the former walk-on. So he's at a 53.5 rushing yard number at Prize Picks. I would expect to see Caleb Jackson as well. His number is 52.5. If both those guys hit the more than, I think there's a good chance LSU wins this game because it means they are controlling the game, controlling the tempo, and they're probably putting the ball in the end zone with regularity. Now, I am a little leery of this. Brian Kelly in these standalone week 1 games, it's not been great. So LSU lost to Florida State the past 2 years in one of these games. And then the year before, he takes his Notre Dame team to Florida State, and it wasn't a particularly great Florida State team. And they got out Notre Dame got out by the skin of their teeth in that game. So it's not been the best circumstances for Brian Kelly in these games. But I don't know that really means much at this point because really it's about, does that offensive line control the line of scrimmage, and is LSU's defense better? Meanwhile, on the other side, is USC's defense better? So the number for Miller Moss, your new USC quarterback, is 285.5. Now, he threw for 372 yards and 6 touchdowns in his last start. That was the bowl game against Louisville. He was awesome. Now he's breaking in some younger receivers. Now, these guys have played, but they've not played huge roles. Zachariah Branch is probably the guy who's played the biggest role, but his biggest pops have been on special teams. Now, can he do that in the flow of the offense? Because he's really special with the ball in his hands. He's at 57.5 yards receiving for this game on Prize Picks. But they've got a bunch of young guys. Deuce Robinson, 44.5 receiving. We'll see who else steps up. And then LSU, same thing. Just like USC, you have the backup quarterback ascending to the starting role, kind of like everybody used to do and nobody does anymore. But Garrett Nussmeier takes over for Jaden Daniels. So remember, in both these cases, you have a new quarterback who's been waiting his turn, replacing a Heisman Trophy winner. It is. We talk about Florida Miami being the Spider-Man meme game. This is a Spider-Man meme game too, because of the quarterback situation and because both teams had defenses that stunk. They replaced their defensive staff and they hope things are better. LSU's receiving situation. So receiver Chris Hilton has a bone bruise. He's trying to play. We don't know if he's going to play. CJ Daniels, Liberty transfer. I would imagine he's going to get some targets. Mississippi State transfer Xavier Thomas should play a role. Kyron Lacey's the guy you probably expect to get the most from as a returning starter for LSU. 65.5 receiving yards on Prize Picks for Kyron Lacey. So this will be very interesting, because do we get the shootout because both defenses are what they were last year, or do they make this a more conventional game where they're getting some stops? I do think if both defenses are a little better and you have both teams getting stops, LSU's ability to control the ground game could be very important. We expect LSU's offensive line to be the best offensive line in this game. USC has Jonah Monheim at center, but in terms of just future NFL prospects, LSU's got more. So we'll find out. But keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on Woody Marks, former Mississippi State running back. He's at USC now. He'll be their RB1, and his Prize Picks number 67.5. Joe Quavius is his real name. He goes by Woody because he wore Toy Story pajamas all the time as a kid. These are the tips you get. These are the pro tips you get when you're rolling with Andy Staples on 3. So we'll see what happens. The more than on both the quarterbacks is enticing, because it's one of those things where you kind of want to see the defensive improvement on the field before you believe it. And I could see a shootout in this game, and that would be really fun. And this game, like the Florida-Miami game, is going to produce some blazing takes that may not actually mean anything. Because, again, because both teams had terrible defenses last year, we don't really, and both of them probably should have very good offenses this year. We don't really know what it means. Like, if somebody hangs 40 on somebody else, it might just be that the offense is awesome and the defense looks better against other teams. I don't know that we're going to be able to take as much from this game as we think, but we will certainly attempt to. We will extrapolate the hell out of this thing when we get a result. And the negativity toward the losing coach is going to be high. Just like Florida-Miami, you had guys that were hired in the same offseason. These two were actually, they moved on the same day, and they both left prestigious programs to go where they went. So, Lincoln Riley leaves Oklahoma to go to USC. Brian Kelly leaves Notre Dame to go to LSU. Both kind of overachieved in year one, came back to earth a little bit in year two, and now we're going to see what they've done to retool in year three. I can't wait for this game. I cannot wait. So that is Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. We're going live after that game too. So it's going to be a cavalcade of, I'm going to be showing up on your YouTube feed over and over again this weekend. I don't apologize for that. We've been waiting all off season for this. We wait 9 months to get here, and we're finally here. So download that Prize Picks app. Remember, play $5, get $50 instantly when you use the code Staples. And you want a free square this week. Jalen Milroe against Western Kentucky. Alabama's quarterback against Western Kentucky. 0.5 pass yards. They have dropped the number 99% off. Throw that square on there. If he throws for a yard, you win that square. So there you go. Let's do some Dear Andy. Let's answer your questions. My favorite part of any week. My first question, though, was not aimed at me. It was aimed at everybody, but it's something I've been pondering all week, and I love seeing the responses to it because I really feel like it's an even split here. So Robert Behrens, who's the managing editor for the Texas A&M fan site Good Bull Hunting, says, what dictates whether a game is an upset? And the reason Robert's asking this question is so he covers Texas A&M. Texas A&M Notre Dame is a very interesting situation. Notre Dame is ranked 7th in both polls, and Texas A&M is ranked 20th in both polls. But Texas A&M is a favorite in this game. Now, in the graphic, we've got them at 2.5, and that's what we had them. That's what they were at when we did the picks segment earlier this week. That line's actually moved. As of Wednesday afternoon, it was down to -1.5. Texas A&M favored by 1.5. But Texas A&M has been favored since this game got put on the board in May. So it opened with Texas A&M a 1.5 point favorite. It went up to 2.5. There was a point last week where it got up to 3. and then got bet back down and now is back at 1.5, and we'll see where it lands at kickoff. But what's the upset here? Because they're 13 spots apart in the poll. So to the casual just watching the game that sees the numbers next to the team's name, if Texas A&M wins this game by a field goal, that casual is going to be like, oh my God, what a huge upset. And then everybody who follows the lines is going to be, no, this is exactly what Vegas said was going to happen. And so which is it? Which one's the upset? Is the Notre Dame win the upset, or is the Texas A&M win the upset? And so Robert Behrens did it as a poll on Twitter, and that poll expired, and I believe point spread won with 50.9% of the vote, and rankings was 49.1% of the vote. So, I mean, basically a 50-50 split of how people feel about this. Where do I fall in this? I go with the Vegas one. And I'll tell you why. Because I've been an AP poll voter, and I know how coaches vote. Usually it's their ops guy, it's their SID doing the voting. It's not the coach. And what do they have time to watch all these teams and properly evaluate them? Like, I trust an FBS head coach to properly evaluate a team better than a sports writer, for sure. But the problem is they're not really doing that for all these teams because they have a job that's pretty important, and that doesn't really fit into the job. So the rankings, there's no skin off anybody's nose if you get the guess wrong. Like, we guess in the preseason. We have no idea, and we guess. And then when we're wrong, we just move the rankings around as the data come in, and then by the end of the season, the rankings fall into line because you have more data. You have full season worth of data. For the people who make the line, they're also somewhat guessing, but there is a real consequence if they screw it up. So the art of setting the line is you want even action on both sides. That way the casino's not exposed if one result happens and a bunch of people win money. And the way lines work, and we've been talking about how this line has moved since it opened, and it's moved toward Texas A&M and then back toward Notre Dame. It adjusts automatically as action comes in to keep the action even. Where the problem comes in, if you're the person making the line, is if you screwed up initially. If you screwed up initially and everybody pounded your bad line and you've exposed the casino to a bad result, and that bad result happens, the casino loses real money. So there is a real world consequence to these guys getting it wrong. So they have a higher incentive to get it right. And, you know, this was like during the NCAA tournament when the bracket comes out. I love to look at the opening lines because invariably there will be usually 3 or 4 games where the lower seeded team is favored in the point spread. I covered a game like that back in 2009. It was an Arizona-Utah game. Remember when Lute Olson stepped down in Arizona that year? It's a weird year. You know, they had Chase Budinger, who played in the NBA, wound up playing for the U.S. Olympic beach volleyball team. But he was a very good player. Then another player who ended up going number 8 overall in the draft the following year. They were the far more talented team in that Arizona-Utah game, but Arizona was like the last at-large team in. They kind of messed around. They had an interim coach, and you could tell when you got out on the floor before the game started, oh, like Arizona's going to kill Utah. Like they're so much better than Utah. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Now, this was before they were in the same conference together, so you didn't have games between them to tell you, because now they've been in the same conference for years. They were both in the Pac-12 together after Utah joined, and now they're both in the Big 12. But at that point, Utah hadn't joined the Pac-10, soon to become Pac-12. So those games happen. Another game that was like that was the Alabama-Clemson Sugar Bowl after the 2017 season. Remember, Clemson was the 1 seed in that game. Alabama was the 4 seed. A huge controversy. Alabama had lost the Iron Bowl. They get put into the college football playoff. Alabama opened as the favorite in that game. They opened as a 1-point favorite. It actually got bet up to Alabama -3 before the game kicked off, and then Alabama just beat the doors off of Clemson. It was 24-6. It wasn't even it was never close. But that's how that works. Like, I trust Vegas more than I trust voters. Always. Stephen Wilson in the chat. There's always an 11 favor over a 6. Yes, exactly. There's usually an 11 in the NCAA tournament. There's usually an 11 favorite over a 6. There is usually a 5 or a 12 favorite over a 5. Probably not going to see a 12 favorite over a 5 in the college football playoff, but there's a very good chance you see a 5 favorite over a 4, or the winner of 11-6 being favored over a 3. It's entirely possible you're going to get that in the college football playoff. Why are we using our old 12-team projected playoff? Get Florida State out of there. They lost to Georgia Tech. I updated my bracketology. Are we not updating graphics these days? Good Lord. What are we doing? It's been a busy week. Give everybody a break. Give the elves in the On3 headquarters a break. I understand. But yeah. Unfortunately, an updated graphic would have helped because it would have led me into this next question. It's from Todd. You generated a lot of anger ranking Georgia Tech number 4 in your playoff poll. Why can't people accept Georgia Tech's rightful return, as a national power? Oh, we do have an updated graphic. It was right there with the question. I answered this in the bracketology column, but I feel like other people need to hear it. Why did I rank Georgia Tech number 4? And there's two parts to this, because I'm getting yelled at by two separate groups of people. I'm getting yelled at by, why would you slot Georgia Tech in as the ACC champion, from the people who understand how the college football playoff works now. And I'm getting, how in the world can Georgia Tech be the 4 seed, from people who don't understand how the seeding rules work now. Christopher Jordan in the chat, national power? Question mark? Todd is being facetious, Christopher. Todd is joking, I think. Todd's a Georgia Tech grad, so maybe he's not. But I don't know that Haynes King has reached Reggie Ball God status yet. We're gonna have to wait on that. But okay, I'll answer both groups of people. To the people who understand how the playoff actually works, why did I slot Georgia Tech in as the ACC champion? Because Clemson lost 4 games last year, because Miami was 7-6, because I don't know if NC State's defense is going to be able to replace Peyton Wilson and all they lost, because I'm not sure I trust Louisville against a much tougher schedule than the one they played to get to the ACC championship game last year. So that's the issue. I don't trust anybody in the ACC right now. I thought I trusted Florida State. They lost to Georgia Tech. And the way Georgia Tech beat them, by dominating on both lines of scrimmage, says to me that even though Georgia Tech has the hardest schedule in the ACC this year, in conference and out of conference, that they can play with these teams on this schedule. Now, do I think they're going to beat Georgia? No, I don't. But they don't have to beat Georgia to win the ACC. Do they have to beat Notre Dame? No, they don't have to beat Notre Dame to win the ACC. They do have to beat Clemson, probably. They have to beat Louisville, probably. They probably have to beat Miami. Like, they play all those teams. They play Virginia Tech. They play NC State. If they see Clemson, it would be in the ACC championship game, but there's a chance that happens. So, just dismissing Georgia Tech out of hand as a potential ACC title contender, I think, is silly. I also think you guys hate it when we just guess in the preseason. So what's wrong with using the results we have? Now, if Georgia Tech had won in a fluky way, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have just picked Clemson or Miami or Louisville or somebody like that and said, okay, this is who I think is going to win the ACC now. But I'd still just be guessing. But I watched Georgia Tech play really well on both lines of scrimmage. It was very impressive. Haynes King was great. What was Haynes King's biggest problem last year? Interceptions. He threw the ball to the other team a lot. How many interceptions did he throw on Saturday in Dublin? Zilch. 0. So maybe he's turned a corner. Now look, Georgia Tech could lose some games, or Miami could look amazing this week, or NC State could look amazing, or Louisville could look amazing. Like, I'll change these things as the results come in. But just dismissing Georgia Tech out of hand, I think it bothers me because everybody's like, we hate that the same teams are always the ones up in the playoff projections. We hate that the same teams are always the ones everybody talks about in the preseason. But when we put a different team up there, you're like, nope, can't have them. It's only supposed to be these teams. So which is it? You want variety? Or you want us to just keep talking about the same teams over and over again until somebody proves us wrong? In which inevitably somebody will. And maybe Georgia Tech will be the one that proves us wrong this year. Or maybe not. But the good news is we do a new ranking every week and a new bracketology projection every week. So if you don't like it, you may like the next one better. Now, as for the second group, I realize I'm probably not talking to many of you on this show. That those of you who watch this show understand how the college football playoff seeding system works. But in case there's some newbies, we're going to keep drilling this into everybody's head because it's confusing. It literally is confusing, and everybody's going to have to get used to it. Even those of us who talk about it all the time, occasionally I'll have a mental lapse like, no, I have to have a conference champ at 3 or 4. So there are 5 automatic bids that go to conference champions. Those are not tied to any particular conference. The 4 highest ranked conference champions get the top 4 seeds and a bye. The 5th highest ranked conference champion makes the playoff, but isn't slotted into a top 4 seed, doesn't get a bye. More than likely, not guaranteed, more than likely, the champions of the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, and SEC will occupy those first 4 seeds. So unless I think a Boise State is going to beat an Oregon and then win the Mountain West, or USF's going to beat Alabama and beat Miami and then win the American, I'm probably going to have that projected group of 5 champ sitting there at 12. I'm probably going to have the ACC and the Big 12 champ slotted at 3 or 4, unless, let's say, Miami or NC State just goes gangbusters through the first half of the season. They're sitting there at 6-0, and you think, okay, these guys might go undefeated. Then we start talking about, okay, maybe they might be the 1 seed or the 2 seed. But right now, if the records are fairly equal, we're pretty sure the committee is going to pick an SEC or a Big 10 team over them. And so they'll get slotted. And then the other thing is, if the Big 12 champ is number 8, there's still going to be the 3 seed if the ACC champ is ranked lower and the Mountain West or American champ is ranked lower than that. Like, that's how it works. And it's confusing. Nick in the chat, when was Georgia Tech a national power? Man, didn't y'all watch football in the 50s? No respect for the Ramblin' Wreck. The Ramblin' Wreck was actually like street legal when Georgia Tech was a national power. I believe that's a 1934 Model A. So you could probably still drive the Ramblin' Wreck on the street with 0 problems when Georgia Tech was a national power. Goat Dog says the 90s. Nah, they shared the national title in the 1990 season. I was at that Citrus Bowl. But it's not the same thing. That was a really good year. They were year after year good in the 40s and 50s. And so that's what we're talking about. Cameron Merrill, Staples is a spitting image of a ventriloquist dummy. Yeah, you should see the guy behind me with the hand. It's not comfortable. All right, next question. From Thomas. Nope. Producer River, I skipped one. So I'm going to go back to Thomas's question. Besides FSU, which fan base will be demoralized after week 1? Okay, here's the thing, Thomas. FSU might not be demoralized after week 1 because the very quirky Florida State schedule On Monday night, they are playing Boston College. So they might be just fine after week 1. Maybe the Georgia Tech loss it won't be forgotten, but they'll have moved on. And they'll be 1-1 in the ACC and not 0-1. Now, if they're 0-2 in the ACC, then yes, they will be incredibly demoralized. I don't know you come back from that. But Vegas thinks they're going to bounce back. I would imagine they bounce back, but we're going to find out. This is Bill O'Brien taking over the Eagles. Thomas Castellanos, who's must-see TV, is the quarterback. Like, he's a big-time boomer bust quarterback. We're going to talk about a few of those. You've got Garrett Green at West Virginia. Anthony Calandra was named the starter at Virginia. We love Anthony Calandra because something's going to happen when he's on the field. Might be good, might be bad for Virginia, but something's going to happen. Same thing with Thomas Castellanos at Boston College. But I do look at how Bill O'Brien, when he took over Penn State, was excellent with the quarterbacks. He turned Matt McGloin into a guy who played in the NFL. He got more out of Christian Hackenberg than anybody else did. So we'll see with that one. As for the other fan bases that might be the most demoralized, I think any team, like an FBS team that loses to an FCS team, and we talked about Colorado, North Dakota State, Oklahoma State, South Dakota State. We talked about that on Wednesday's show, how dangerous those games are. Those would be incredibly demoralizing. The loser of the Florida-Miami game. The loser of the Florida-Miami game, that fan base is going to be crushed. Because as we talked about yesterday, both those fan bases are convinced they have the superior program, and they're both convinced that the other coach's shortcomings will allow their team to win the game. And so if they get out-schemed by a coach that they deem inferior and their team loses, they're just going to be like, oh, God, what? Now who are we going to beat? How are we going to beat anybody? I think the loser of the LSU-USC game is going to have a demoralized fan base, especially if one of the defenses is better and one of them's not. And that's the difference in the game. That would be a really tough pill to swallow when you've dealt all season with, or all offseason with, we hired these new defensive coaches, everything's going to get better. And like I said, getting torched by one of these offenses may not actually be that indicative of what the defense is going to look like all year. It may be that these two offenses are pretty good. And so if one of them just has a great day, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go into conference play and just get torched every single game. But for two fan bases that just watch their defenses get annihilated all year last year, that's not going to be much solace. Like, they're going to need to see that happen before they believe it. So, yeah, if LSU or USC just goes bananas offensively, the losing fan base, they're going to be pretty crushed. They're going to be pretty inconsolable for at least a week. Now, a question from Steven. You've been touching on tiebreakers all week for the SEC and the Big Ten, but I am interested in another tiebreaker sort of situation. What if at the end of the season there aren't 5 ranked conference champions? What if the ACC and the Big 12 were to beat up on themselves so badly that an unranked team gets into the conference championship and wins one of those leagues, and there somehow ends up with no ranked Group of 5 conference champion teams? Does the committee have to continue ranking past 25, or do we lose the automatic bid and Notre Dame finally gets its day in the sun as the 4 seed? They're going to keep ranking them. This actually isn't really a change. Before, when they had that Group of 5 representative in the New Year's Six Bowls, if they ran into that situation, they would have kept ranking them. Like last year, it got close. I believe Liberty finished 22 and SMU, which was the American champ, finished 23. So they had 2 ranked champions, but they almost didn't. And they would have just had to keep going. But they're hoping that doesn't happen. Hopefully, for everybody's sake, the highest ranked Group of 5 champ. I would love if the highest ranked Group of 5 champ was in the top 12, so you don't have to just boot somebody out who would have been in the top 12. But that's what they'll do. They'll keep ranking them. Next question from Ryan. This is an interesting one. Is being a Penn State fan now similar to being a Dallas Cowboys fan? 10-2 for Penn State and 12-5 for the Cowboys is normally outstanding for 80% of fan bases, but it only comes down to the playoffs now. I think that's exactly right. So Penn State would have made the CFP 6 times since 2016 if this current system had been in place. That's a lot. That's almost as much as anybody. That would be in your probably top 5 appearances nationwide. But it's a little bit different because I don't think Penn State has the hate that the Cowboys get from the non-fans. But in terms of how the fans feel, yeah, you need more. And the Dallas fans, Penn State has had success over the years. They have not been a dominant national power. Like they were really good in the 80s and the 90s, but were probably not the level that the Cowboys were in the mid 90s. The Cowboys were what, Alabama was the last decade in college football in the 90s. They were the dominant force, and you thought this was going to last forever. If you're like me, I'm in high school watching the Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman teams, and I'm like, this is going to last forever. But it didn't. And now they've never gotten back to it. And Penn State, I imagine people feeling the same way because it feels like you're just perpetually underneath Ohio State and Michigan. Now, not in the same division as them anymore. And this is the part where you get to no more excuses. Like, you have to make the playoff. You have to do things in the playoff. And that opener against West Virginia is a good one. It's a good test for them. They played really well against West Virginia opener last year, especially we didn't know how good West Virginia would wind up being. I'm not sure Neil Brown, the coach at West Virginia, had quite figured out how good they would be either. But that was a 9-win West Virginia team, and Penn State handled them pretty easily. But that was a Penn State team that, by the Michigan game, fans were booing the play calling at home. So what is Andy Kotelnicki's offense going to look like? Is Drew Aller allowed to try a little more downfield? These are all important questions. And then, if you're Penn State, if you're a fan, yeah, you should expect a playoff appearance. And you should be disappointed if they don't make it. You should expect better. It's going to be a fun game. That game in Morgantown, it could wind up being the most interesting one of the weekend. Just because the way West Virginia is competitive in this game, or the way West Virginia wins this game, if West Virginia can win this game, there will be some Houdini stuff accomplished by Garrett Green, their quarterback. Because that's the only way this works. That's the only way they win that game. Nick in the chat, Penn State can't afford the loss. Actually, they can. Like, you can lose this game, and if you do well in the Big Ten, and if Penn State were to make the Big Ten title game and make the playoff as an at-large, it doesn't matter if you lost to West Virginia. But that's another one where the fan base would just be devastated because it would be like, if we can't beat these guys, how are we supposed to be one of the best 3 teams in the Big Ten or the best 4 teams in the Big Ten? But West Virginia could be really good too. That's the other part of it is West Virginia could be one of those teams that's a sneaky Big 12 title contender. So again, it's going to be, if West Virginia wins, you're going to have Penn State fans wanting to jump off a cliff, but it might not be the end of the world. It might just mean West Virginia's good. But I'm not going to be able to tell you that and have you believe me at 3:30 on Saturday afternoon if that's what happens. So yeah, the Penn State fans suffering. Now, the good news, I guess, you're not talked about every day on First Take. Because again, the hatred from the other fan bases is not the same as the level of the hatred for the Cowboys. I think that's been reserved for Michigan and Ohio State. Colorado is the one, because of Deion, that is the lightning rod that people have a strong opinion on one way or the other. I don't think Penn State at this point is a team that people have a super strong opinion on if they're not a Penn State fan or a fan of another Big Ten team that Penn State plays. So Now you get good enough and everyone will suddenly develop strong opinions about you. That's the deal with Alabama. That's the deal with Georgia. And so there was a question in the chat earlier. Why is Deion polarizing and why isn't Nick Saban polarizing? Nick Saban is very polarizing. Everything Nick Saban says and does gets parsed. Like, it's not that different. Nick Saban's won so much that I think even the people who don't like him begrudgingly respect him. Deion hasn't pulled that off as a coach yet. Obviously, he's very respected as a player by everyone. But yeah, I think that's why. But this Penn State thing, it's got to be frustrating at this point because it can be better. So we'll find out. This one from Power Lip Out. Can you describe a world where the SEC and Big Ten don't have playoff seeds 1, 2, 5, or 6? What kind of chaos happens to cause this? Is the most likely iteration of this Notre Dame at 5, Big 12, ACC at 1 and 2 with a group of 5, ACC or Big 12 at 6? Yeah, that would be wild. I guess that would be the SEC and the Big 10 good teams beating up on each other so much that the SEC and Big 10 champs are 3-loss teams, and somebody goes undefeated in the ACC. Somebody wins the Big 12 at 12-1. You know, you have a really good, let's say, okay, this will feed into the Big 10 one. Let's say Oregon loses to Boise State in week 2. Let's say Boise State beats Oregon, goes on to win the Mountain West undefeated. Like, they're probably a top 4 seed at that point. So you could actually have ACC, Big 12, and Mountain West champ in your top 4. And then, you know, the SEC or the Big 10 champ takes another one of those spots. And then we see, but that's pretty much how it happens. But yes, Notre Dame going undefeated, taking the 5 spot would do that. But it would be very unlikely. It is possible, though. It's absolutely possible. I'm glad you asked this, Power Lip Out, because this is another one where I think people who don't understand how the playoff seeding works, who thinks the seedings are specifically tied to conferences, wouldn't get how that worked. But that's how it would work if it happened. This is from Jeff. I can't believe you just gloss over such a serious crime like the Oklahoma recruiting violations. This morally corrupt program is breaking precious NCAA rules that are put in place to protect innocent teenagers, and you just shrug it off. Don't you have any respect for the integrity of this great game? Vacate all their wins, take down the banners, give back the Heismans. It's clear there's a pattern of systemic cheating going on there. We can only guess how far back it goes. I have no doubt Wilkinson that's Bud Wilkinson, was contacting recruits via impermissible carrier pigeons. Forfeit those titles. Jason White needs to give back his Heisman. I'm sure Stoops talked to him once too. This is unacceptable, and your lack of giving it the proper attention it deserves simply for internet clout is sickening. Thanks. I'll hang up and listen. Oh, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Jeff had an addendum. If you can't tell by the carrier pigeon line, I'm being incredibly facetious. Really enjoy you roasting all the pearl clutchers on Twitter. Keep it up. So Jeff isn't actually worried about Oklahoma and the impermissible phone calls and text messages that DeMarco Murray made that got him suspended for the Temple game on Friday night. But what he's talking about is he's been following me on Twitter this week. So you guys watched the show when I reviewed the Connor Stallions documentary on Tuesday. And I talked about how I feel about the rule that Michigan broke. It's a stupid rule. Like, all the games are on TV. There's 80,000 people in the stadium. Who cares if you video the signals? It's dumb. It is a rule, though. And for whatever reason, there's people on the internet who don't grasp that I can think a rule is stupid and yet still understand that you get punished for violating that rule. And what's interesting is they don't seem to grasp that Michigan has been punished and will continue to be punished. They keep saying, well, look at what happened to Jim Tressel. Okay. Jim Tressel lied to the NCAA, got a 5-year show cause that had a 5-game suspension plus the postseason game suspension. Jim Harbaugh, I don't know if he actually lied, but he played the I do not recall game in the face of eyewitness testimony and evidence, which is basically the same thing. He got a 4-year show cause He was suspended for 3 games by Michigan at the beginning of last season. And that 4-year show cause includes an entire year of suspension that he wouldn't even be allowed to be in the building. So you can argue that he got as bad of a penalty as Tressel or more for the same thing. And then Harbaugh also got suspended by the Big Ten for 3 games for the Connor Stallion stuff. And they're going to get hit more for the Connor Stallion stuff. They'll have more tacked on once this committee hearing happens, which is going to be a while. So Jim Harbaugh actually was suspended for 6 games for 2 different cases in 2013 or 2023, excuse me. It's actually the most serious in-season suspensions we've ever seen handed down in college football to a coach. And that's what's so funny about this. Like, the Ohio State fans think that Tressel got treated differently somehow. Like, Ohio State didn't have Jim Tressel's back. They forced him out. If they'd had his back like Michigan had Harbaugh's back, I mean, because in this situation, Michigan would have, if you wanted it to be done equally by the schools, Michigan would have fired Harbaugh over the Cheeseburger Gate stuff in the offseason before last year. That's what Ohio State did. They didn't fire Tressel, but they forced him out. Now, you can argue that forcing out Tressel and hiring Urban Meyer made Ohio State football better than it would have been under late era Jim Tressel. But that's not really important. That's just lucky that happened for Ohio State. But it's kind of similar. So what's the problem? Like, they've been punished. They will continue to be punished. They will be further punished. Like, what more do you actually want? And what's really funny about it, if you have no rooting interest in this rivalry, is that Connor Stallions quit. Everybody changed their signals. Michigan got punished. Jim Harbaugh got suspended. So you took your boogeyman, who is Jim Harbaugh, if you're Ohio State, you took your boogeyman off the board. So you got to play against not Jim Harbaugh instead of Jim Harbaugh. And you still lost all of that. And you still lost. I get why you're mad. Because you did all that and you still lost. I guess I'd be mad too. But you need to have some consideration for everybody. Kevin, how did you forget Ohio State had to vacate wins? Because I don't remember anybody having to vacate wins. Because who cares? We saw the games. They were on TV. Like, they're on YouTube. You can make Michigan vacate the wins. Who cares? We all watch the games. If Michigan has to vacate the Ohio State win, guess what? They still beat Ohio State. Kevin, so that means Michigan has to vacate wins too, right? Oh, maybe. That case is not finished yet. Steven in the chat, vacated wins are dumb as hell. Yes, just like the rules against the videoing of the other sideline. So, but to review, I'm allowed to think rules are stupid, but also allowed to understand that there are punishments. And look, with Michigan, I've said this many times, like, they deserve to be punished for being incredibly stupid. Like, as dumb as I think the rule is, it's pretty easy to do it to break it without getting caught. Like, you have to be incredibly stupid to get caught. Connor Stallions has Venmo account public. How stupid can you be? So yes, I would prefer that they eliminate dumb rules and just punish people for abject stupidity. And I think in this case, you would get punished for abject stupidity. But again, if you think Michigan hasn't already been punished, 3-game suspension, including their 2 biggest games of the regular season, is probably the most serious in-season suspension ever handed down to a coach. Just because it didn't work out the way you wanted it to when he was suspended doesn't change the fact that it happened. So If they vacate wins, who cares? Like, you people who worry about whether wins get vacated, like, what's wrong with you? Explain to me how that matters. Because I will show you a YouTube clip of the game. It won't change anything. You're still going to lose to Michigan when I call up that YouTube clip. Michigan's still going to lose to you when I call up that YouTube clip. So funny. So funny. This question from @321Noel. It's not a question. He didn't send this to me. It's just a statement he put on the internet. And this is one of those that probably should have stayed in the group chat. If Florida State loses to BC this weekend, I will eat dog poop out of a red Solo cup with a spoon and post a video of me doing it. Book it. This is not something that you should say publicly. This is not something you should promise. People keep receipts. I mean, you don't need to pay this off if this happens. 321 please don't. In fact, nobody needs to see that. You don't need to do that. But this is like one of those things of the social media era that as an old person, I fail to understand. Because I wouldn't have gotten pre-social media to find a big group of people. Like, you probably have to go to the mall food court on a Saturday and stand on a table and say something if you wanted to reach several hundred people that you didn't know. Like, would I stand on the table in the mall food court on Saturday and say this? No. So why are you putting it on the internet? Why? Why? God bless you, 321 For your sake, I hope Florida State wins this game. Because, man, if BC wins, it's going to be ugly. This one from Steve. Andy, how is it possible JP Pickles is not the starting quarterback at UTEP for as long as he wants to be? His name is JP Pickles, for goodness sake. That name alone should override anything else. I got bad news for you, Steve. UTEP's going to Nebraska to open the season. We're all going to focus our attention on Dylan Raiola, the other quarterback in this game. But JP Pickles, not in the competition to be QB1 at UTEP at the moment. Now, he's young. Give him time. But it's either going to be Skylar Locklear or Cade McConnell. Scotty Walden has not named a starter yet. He says he's pretty sure he knows who it's going to be, but he's, got to keep that a secret. Can't have the Huskers knowing who it's going to be. But unfortunately, we know it's not going to be JP Pickles. But who knows? Like I said, he's young. Give him time. Last one comes from Ian. Dear Andy, can you explain how you became friends with the Pardon My Take guys? I'm an AWL, which is Pardon My Takees for award-winning listener, and started following your content after hearing you a couple times on PMT. I would imagine quite a few of us college football sickos found you that way. Love your show. So thank you, Ian, and thank you for coming. And thank you if there's anybody new who heard me on Pardon My Take this week and came by. So these guys have been very nice to me. It's Dan Katz, Big Cat, and PFT commenter. They run the biggest podcast in sports. I think it's them or the Kelsey brothers, and millions of people listen to them every episode they drop, and they bring me on to talk about college football every once in a while, and it's a blessing. But I'm also a giant fan of the show, and I actually was not a regular listener of the show until they started having me on, and then I became an AWL just like you guys. Was laughing my butt off because Jerry O'Connell, the actor, is like a super fan, and they bring him on. He's married to Rebecca Romaine. They actually called Rebecca Romaine on the show this week. It was maybe the funniest segment they've ever done. But so how did I wind up getting to know those guys? Well, I actually met PFT before that show started. I was at South by Southwest in Austin. I was speaking on a panel with Chris Delcani, who was then the TCU athletic director. Now he's the Texas athletic director, and Emmanuel Acho, who had, I think, just finished his career at Texas at that point. And so I was at some mixer bar, and a friend of mine says, "Hey, this is so-and-so," and you can look up his real name on the internet if you want to, but PFT, he goes by PFT commenter on the internet, and I already followed him on the internet because he's one of the funnier people on the internet. And So it was cool to get to meet him and watch how his career has taken off. And so I then get a DM later from Dan Katz, from Big Cat. And I find out that they asked me to come on the show, and it was, I can't even remember which year it was right before the national title game. And they wanted me to talk about the national title game matchup. It may have been Alabama, Georgia, actually. And so they had gotten my name from Dana Holgerson, who was the head coach at West Virginia at the time. And I don't know if it was Dana or if it was Ryan Dorchester, his chief of staff, or Alex Hammond, who worked for him at the time, who Alex is his agent now. But me and these guys and Bruce Feldman, who works for The Athletic and Fox, had gone out to dinner in New York one time, and we went to a pizza place. And we ordered this appetizer, and it was like these roasted potatoes was an appetizer. They forgot to bring us the roasted potatoes. We'd eaten our pizza. It was very good pizza, by the way. We'd eaten our pizzas, and we're getting done, and the server comes back, and they said, well, is there anything else? I said, well, you forgot our potatoes. And they're like, oh, well, we'll bring your potatoes out. And everybody looks at me like, why are you bringing the potatoes? Like, we're done. We just had the pizza. And at that point, I was like, well, now I'm committed because they're bringing the potatoes. I'm going to eat the potatoes. So I ate the potatoes, and we spent the whole time talking about post-pizza potatoes. And so someone in the West Virginia contingent passed this along to the Pardon My Take guys. PFT had met me. And then I just have to imagine they were like, who is this freak who demands potatoes after the main course has already been served? We must get to know him better. And so that's how it happened. Goat dog, don't you dare forget my starches. That's right. Listen, I'm a different eater now. I think I would have let the potatoes go. But if that had happened, then I never would have met those guys. And it has been a lot of fun. I bumped into them at an LSU-Alabama game one year, and it was their first time at an Alabama-LSU game in Baton Rouge. And I was like, guys, you just get ready. And it's been fun watching them discover a lot of this college football stuff. But they also, unlike most general sports podcasts, understand college football very well, are very deep into it, and explain it very well. So I love going on that show because it's always a really fun, deep conversation about college football, and they don't take themselves too seriously. They're just funny. So that's why. And my random rankings on my Dear Andy column, which you can read at On3 today, not ripped off from their Mount Rushmores. Mine came first. And of course, they didn't invent Mount Rushmore either. They just perfected it. So, but that's how it happened. So if you're new here because you heard me on Pardon My Take this week, welcome. Sorry to change the schedule up on you when you just got here, but we are going to do that. So here's your announcement again for the schedule. So we've been doing shows Monday through Friday. The season's starting. We're going to move that Friday live show to Saturday after the game. So there will be no live show Friday morning. But tomorrow there will be content. If you're in the podcast feed, you can hear me talking about the games tonight. That'll be up in your podcast feed when you wake up in the morning. Tonight after the games, you want to come hang with me live here on YouTube, you can. And then starting Monday, we move from 8 a.m. Eastern time to 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. So feel free to sleep in a little more or get a little work done, however you want to do it. But we'll see you at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time on Monday. But of course, we're going to talk a bunch between now and then. Ladies and gentlemen, week 1 starts tonight, 6 p.m. Rutgers against Howard, 8 o'clock Eastern time. North Dakota State at Colorado, North Carolina at Minnesota. It's all happening. It is time. Welcome to week 1. We made it, everybody. We'll talk to you tonight.